Now we can move to the next section, which is another super interesting topic, decentralized clinical trials. I think, as many others, I think that the trials need to reach the patients. Every patient should have the opportunity to participate in a clinical trial if they wish to do so. And we are so lucky to have today not one but two members of the clinical trial coordination group. There is Monique with us, okay, Hal, the special advisor at Central Committee on Research Involving Human Subjects and scientific lead of the Decentralized Clinical Trials Project. And congratulations for being the vice chair of the group. And also Ditte Christensen, that will join us virtually, and they will provide an overview of the recommendation paper and plans for the implementation phase of decentralized clinical trials. So I invite Monique to take the Ditte, sorry, my mistake. I think that you want to start the presentation. You want to say something first? Please do so.
Oh, no worries. Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I will leave the word on this to Monique because you have her in the room. But yes, we have been driving the drafting of this recommendation paper together, and we're very happy for the invite to present the work here. So I'll leave the floor to you, Monique.
Okay, thank you, Ditte. And just to confirm that I'm also happy that we have been invited to this meeting to share the outcome of the project on decentralized clinical trials, where some of you have been involved as well. So let's start by thanking the representatives from this group in this very nice project, which is a great outcome, I have to say. And thanks to an excellent project manager, which is Ditte, joining remotely. So thank you. Next slide. If we're talking about decentralized clinical trials, in our project we have used the term decentralized elements because a full DCT is not often happening so much, but decentralized elements are used in clinical trials very often, and it comes increasingly. And well, if you think about decentralized element, what elements are of interest then? So first of all, I think the home health visits. So visits at a trial participant's home instead of a visit at the investigational site, or the use of teleconsultation. Another aspect with the decentralized element is the use of electronic informed consent procedures with a remote consent form, and a direct shipment of investigational medicinal products to the trial participant's home instead of getting them at the trial site itself. So you can see that the decentralized clinical trial approach seeks advantages of technology progress and introduce new methodologies, and it makes clinical trials more easily accessible and participation more convenient for trial participants. So it will result maybe in more flexibility for trial participants, but there is also another side, of course, that there will be less direct interaction between investigator and trial participants. And what is the consequence of that? Next slide, please. So before going more in detail of these different topics of our recommendation paper, I just want to emphasize that this project was really a broad cross-functional collaboration project. We had people in from the European Commission, and then by the clinical trial expert group, where ethics is representative, also people from the medical device and the IVD area. We also had people from the HMA group in the form of the Clinical Trial Coordination Group, which are representative from the National Competent Authority assessing clinical trials. And we had also representative from many groups without the network of the European medicine agencies from the different groups like Scientific Advice Working Group, the GCP Inspector Group. It was a major part in our project, but also the methodology working group, people from the pediatric committee. I can go on, and also you from the patient and consumer working party and the healthcare professional working party. So it was really cross-functional and a really great project with a lot of input from all parties involved, and yeah, really appreciate also the input from the people from your group. They are mentioned here on the slide. Thanks again. Next slide. So the outcome of the project was a recommendation paper, and it has been published on Ouderlex Volume 10 in December last year. And it consisted of a paper with all kind of recommendation and also a national provision overview. Although the aim of this paper was to harmonize, I think Peter said when he reflected on the multi-stakeholder platform, that harmonization was key all the time. And it was also an important aspect within our project to come to a harmonized approach on the use of decentralized elements in clinical trials within the whole European medicinal regulatory network. Nevertheless, it was not possible to harmonize on every aspect, and mainly because of national legislation. So apart from the recommendation paper, there is an annex to the paper which gives a provision overview per member state for certain elements which deviate from the harmonized recommendation. So you can find the distinctions in the national provision overview. That was a very nice feature, I think, for sponsors and investigators if you want to start up a clinical trial. But it had another objective as well, because by making it transparent that there is harmonization on certain aspects, it might also initiate activities on a national level to see how we can harmonize more within the European Medicinal Regulatory Network. So the recommendation paper is published. It will be updated as knowledge and experience evolve. Next slide, please. So the recommendation paper was not only focusing on a harmonized approach, but also on a trial participant-centered and a risk-based approach. And also an important aspect is that there should be investigator and sponsor oversight. When the clinical trial, the conduct of the clinical trial is moving from the traditional way of doing clinical trials at the clinical trial site in a hospital setting and moving towards more remote areas, the trial participant home, but it can be other areas as well. It is very important that investigator and sponsor keep oversight of trial participant safety and the collection of data, which should be reliable and robust. So a trial with decentralized elements give opportunities, but also there are challenges to address, which have to be managed and to have to be mitigated. Next slide, please. Here an overview of the content of the recommendation paper. It starts with an introduction, scope, and some general considerations. Then clinical trial oversight, informed consent process is addressed, delivery of medicinal products and administration at home, trial-related procedures at home, and some specifics with respect to data collection and management and the handling of source data and trial monitoring. And today I will only touch on the topics 2, 3, and 4, which might be of the most interest for you. Next slide. So what I just said, when moving from the more traditional clinical trial site to the trial participant's home, one of the consequences is that the on-site visit will be reduced. There will be much more involvement of service providers, like for instance a trial nurse visiting trial participant at home, significantly more use of new technology, new electronic systems. And by this, the amount of incoming data by using wearables, home nursing, patient reporting outcome will increase significantly. Nevertheless, the responsibilities based on the IGA 6 of good clinical practice remains the same with respect to the sponsor and investigator responsibility. Dus although tasks might be delegated to service providers or delegated to a wearable and technical feature, the sponsor should still be aware, and also the investigator, about their responsibilities, and that they are able to keep oversight on trial participant safety and well-being. Next slide, please. So clear roles and responsibilities should be there. This can be done by making an overview of which tasks are conducted at what place, when, and by whom, and how oversight is maintained. And this has to be clearly described in the protocol or a protocol-related document, part of the submission to the clinical trial assessors. A clear communication plan is also key when so many different parties could be involved. So a communication plan between sponsor, investigator, participants, and service providers. And the trial participants should be informed about this information flow, and also how to make contact in case of acute safety situations, or if a device does not function properly, or if there are other questions, how can they contact the investigator or other service provider to take care that there is still a adequate oversight of the well-being and safety of the subject, of the trial participant. Next slide. The informed consent process, which consists, of course, about a recruitment procedure, an informed consent letter, an informed consent document to give your informed consent, and there can be many different forms and shapes. With respect to the interview, it could be a remote video, it could be physical on-site, it could also be combinations of video and an on-site visit. The same for the subject information letter, the patient information leaflet. It could be on paper, it could be digital, or by video, or even also a combination of the three. And the signature to consent to participate in a clinical trial can be electronic, or can still be a wet ink by posting, or do it at the clinical trial site in front of the investigator. Especially the last one, the signature, the electronic signature, this was very different, regulated between member states, and there were member states where it is even not allowed yet. So this is one of the topics which is addressed in the national provision overview with the country-specific requirements. Next slide. So again, the informed consent process is a very important part in the whole recruitment of trial participants. And it should be tailored to the trial, of course, the way it's done, but also to the specific trial population. And it is clear that the trial participants should always be fully informed and able to ask questions. So the whole process should be described step by step, including how the selection and the evaluation of eligibility of the trial participants is taking place. And the common agreement was that this in general include a physical meeting with the trial, between the investigator and the trial participant. Nevertheless, we can see that there could be situations that a remote interview without a physical on-site meeting can be justified, but it really depends on the vulnerability of the trial population and the knowledge of the efficacy and safety profile of the IMP and the complexity of the trial. And this is all about informing patients and getting informed consent. But it's important to mention that informed consent is not only of an ethical or legal importance, but good communication between investigator and the trial participants creates mutual trust and promote trial compliance. So this should really not be underestimated and should be clearly and sufficiently time taken for this procedure. Next slide, please. So the delivery of medicinal product and administration at home, this was also a topic which was very much different regulated among the different member states. Again, so I want to refer to the national provision overview, especially when it relates to the delivery of the medicinal product at the trial participant's home. There are some aspects which are, of course, of importance. Who is responsible to request and initiate a shipment of this product to the trial participant home, and that is really the investigator. And if you are considering to doing so, it should also be feasible, of course, to do so. Are there specific storage conditions in place, and is it feasible to have that in a trial participant's home? Or are there specific instructions, complex instructions for the administration? Well, it might not also be a good idea to do it at home and do it otherwise. But anyway, clear instructions to participants are always should always be there. But I think feasibility should be considered before even considering sending IMPs to the trial participant home. And if so, there is the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, and we should be very careful with respect to sharing privacy data, private data, to other people than the investigator. So that should be really taken into account if, for instance, the product is delivered by somebody who is not involved at all in the clinical trial, but just delivering the IMP to the trial participant. Next slide. So there were many general considerations in the paper, but I just want to highlight one of which is a very important one, is that under all circumstances, the general medical rules to protect trial participants' safety should be upheld, in particular when patients are separated from their traditional care centers. And depending on the trial population, the disease, the type of assessments done, and the characteristics of the investigational medicinal product, including its stage of development and its efficacy and safety profile, you have to consider which element can be justified, decentralized element can be justified to include and not. And in this justification and the consideration which should be used and not, it's very important that patient or patient organizations are involved as well as investigators, because the implementation should be according to trial participants and investigators' needs, and this is clearly expressed in the general consideration chapter of this recommendation paper. Next slide. We're almost there. So the paper was published on the Euderlex Volume 10. That is not normally a place where academic researchers find their information, and we find it important to become more visible and share this recommendation paper and make people aware, especially within the academic setting. So we were very lucky that the Lancet accepted a paper from the project team where we try to spread the news about this recommendation paper and make people aware of people involved in clinical trials aware of these recommendations. Next slide, please. So the next steps is that we will continue to update the national provision overview. The recommendation paper will be translated in a best practice for our assessors, also to harmonize the assessment of clinical trial application in case the decentralized elements are being part of the application. And to gain experience, a tracker will be developed where we track clinical trials with decentralized elements to see which elements are easy acceptable, for which decentralized elements were a lot of discussion during the clinical trial assessment, and to learn and also use this experience by updating the recommendation paper. Next slide. So again, here are all the names of the people involved. It were 45 experts across 12 member states. The recommendation paper was endorsed by a GCP Inspector Working Group, CTCG and CTEG. With all the input from the different groups. And again, a big thank to you. And hopefully we can continue the collaboration in future updates of this paper. And I think this was the end. Yep. Okay, thank you.